Hello, everybody. Adam Crowther here, the Student Services Manager at DBS. We're delighted to launch our first podcast part of the Elevate program, and I am joined here today by my colleague Hamza Razaq, who is the Wellbeing Officer at DBS, and we're also joined by CK, who is a careers coach with the careers team at DBS as well. So a star-studded team here today for this episode. Today we'll be talking. So we recently launched the Elevate program, and we spoke in detail, more specifically about the leadership value system adopted by Lift Ireland, and we're going to be exploring it in kind of more detail. One of the values today, which is underpinned within the program, and it's around empathy and understanding, and we, I suppose, believe this is an important factor within the leadership value system. And before I bring CK and before I bring Hamza in, I'll just read the piece on empathy and understanding as defined by Lift Ireland. So they say, empathy and understanding is by making an effort to understand others, we show that we care about their perspectives and their experiences, even if we do not share the same views. This is the ability to understand and empathize with others offers one of the greatest attributes that one can possess. And I really think that's an important value for anyone in business going forward to adopt. And I don't know, CK or Hamza, what are your thoughts around, you know, the importance of empathy and understanding?
John, oh yeah, I can go first, CK.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's totally fine. So it kind of like touches on a lot of little topics there when you talk about empathy and sympathy. A lot of people think that, oh, it's just related to welfare, it's related to well-being. There's a different approach to this when it comes to being a leader, or when it comes to someone that wants to become a better leader or wants to become that individual and improve. And one thing you got to keep in mind, and I'll talk about this in future sessions when we have the self development and the life skills section of the program, but just remember for now that empathy feels connection and sympathy can feel disconnection. And for now, keep that in mind when we do discuss some of the topics that we're going to talk about when it comes to leadership, is that people can feel or they can see when something is genuine. And genuine empathy does feel connection, and genuine sympathy is well too. But a lot of problems that come with faking the sympathy or showing sympathy but not actually meaning it, it can feel disconnection, because people will know that you're not being genuine. And if you really are going to be a good leader, and if you want people to, work for you, get behind you, and get motivated by you, you've got to be able to master empathy and sympathy, both.
Yeah, I'm just going to echo just what Hamza was saying there. Relationships are so important for anything when it comes to life. So whether it's to do with your personal life or to do with your professional life, your ability to build relationships it's important. And empathy and understanding, this is where your ability to build those relationships comes from. So like Hamza was saying there, we all have feelings, we have perspectives, we can see things. When you say something, I want to feel supported, listened to, encouraged, motivated, influenced, whatever it might be, depending on the relationship that I have with you. So if your words are not genuine, even if I have a smidgen of like this feeling that this person doesn't truly understand where I'm coming from, or is not trying to show me any empathy, all it does is just crumble that idea of the relationship that I thought that we had, and going forward, that disconnect is just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger because of the fact that there is no empathy, because of the fact that there's no understanding. That person doesn't feel a connection, doesn't feel motivated. And if you think about being a leader, why am I going to try and follow anything that you're saying to me, follow your vision or anything that you're trying to create, if I feel like you don't truly care about anything that I'm either going through or feeling, or even just in regards to the relationship that we have, you know? Yeah.
And I think as well, in order to lead as well, you really need to have a picture of your people and the people around you, because you can't guide, nurture, and direct unless you have a better understanding of where they are on that day, on that week, or that phase of their lives. And that happened to me before. I was managing a team, and they needed a bit of a shake-up, and I needed to get a response from them to see who was going to step up. And I remember being a bit tough on them. And it was required. And usually it does work to get a response because of maybe the nature. And then I realized, that one of them was living homeless, during that period. And that changed everything. And that showed a real lack of empathy from me, because I failed to understand where they were, and maybe, to disconnect their behavior. Why would you, be motivated to do something else for someone else? When you're living homeless, of course you're going to be, behaving in a certain way or disconnected. And for me, that shows a real lack of empathy from my side. And it was a real lesson in what you should and shouldn't be doing, with people that you're working with. But lots to discuss today anyway. And I know, Hamza, you're a big fan. I'm about to show kind of a sound bite of one of our favorite videos that we always present at the leadership training, called the Lollipop Moment. And I think it's a really important video. It encapsulates the importance of empathy and how leadership can be redefined and repackaged and repurposed for everyone. And that practicing particularly an understanding of people can have, I suppose, life-changing moments for everyone. I don't know, I won't talk too much before I press play, but do you have anything you want to
add? Yeah, just to kind of add in there, is that when you do watch this video or listen to the audio for this, it may not make sense to you right away. So let that kind of digest, pause it once it's done, and then actually think back yourself. Think back yourself that, okay, who was that person for me? Okay, and then who was I, who did I provide that for? If that makes sense. When you listen to the audio, then these questions will make sense. And once you're able to reflect back on that, it'll give you a better idea of where you are on your own kind of scale of development, and what you can do to actively start implementing a pathway for your own growth. And just to kind of lastly touch upon kind of obviously as a growth perspective, but to touch upon empathy, a lot of people think that empathy or sympathy is just something that you're good at. They think that, oh, you're born, some people are just really empathetic, some people are really sympathetic. It's more of a result of all the other things that you do. So if someone says they have good empathy, I'm like, well, you're telling me you have a good result, but tell me about all the other stuff that you do, because it's all the other things that you do it's actually what results in good empathy. So people who have good empathy are usually very good at perspective taking. They're very good at people putting themselves in other people's shoes. They're very good at being non-judgmental. They're very good at listening to people in their frame of mind and in their space. So if you're able to do those things, then yeah, you're going to be very empathetic. You're going to be very sympathetic. But if you can't do those things and you tell me you're empathetic, then no, you're not, because those are the key skills you need, which result in being very empathetic and sympathetic. So do bear that stuff in mind. And then while you're listening to this audio about the lollipop moments, hopefully it does make sense to you about what we're trying to, touch upon. And then when you guys come back from that audio, then ask yourself the same questions: that who did that for you? And have you, well, actually, no, I don't want to spoil it, but who you, have you done it for someone else? Okay.
Thanks, Hamza. So without further ado, I will press play. So I hope you guys enjoy the lollipop moment.
I want to start by asking everyone in the audience here a question. How many of you are completely comfortable with calling yourselves a leader? See, I've asked that question all the way across the country, and everywhere I ask it, no matter where, there's always a huge portion of the audience that won't put up their hand. And I've come to realize that we have made leadership into something bigger than us. We made it into something beyond us. We made it about changing the world. And we've taken this title of leader and we treat it as if it's something that one day we're going to deserve. But to give it to ourselves right now means a level of arrogance or cockiness that we're not comfortable with. And I worry sometimes that we spend so much time celebrating amazing things that hardly anybody can do, that we've convinced ourselves that those are the only things we're celebrating. And we start to devalue the things that we can do every day. And we start to take moments where we truly are a leader, and we don't let ourselves take credit for it, and we don't let ourselves feel good about it. And I've been lucky enough over the last 10 years to work with some amazing people who have helped me redefine leadership in a way that I think has made me happier. And with my short time today, I just want to share with you the one story that is probably most responsible for that redefinition. I went to a school on a little school called Mount Allison University in Sackville, New Brunswick. And on my last day there, a girl came up to me and she said, "I remember the first time that I met you." And then she told me a story that happened 4 years earlier. She said, "On my day before I started university, I was in the hotel room with my mom and my dad, and I was so scared and so convinced that I couldn't do this, that I wasn't ready for university, that I just burst into tears. And my mom and my dad were amazing. They were like, 'Look, we know you're scared, but let's just go tomorrow. Let's go to the first day. And if at any point you feel as if you can't do this, that's fine. Just tell us, we will take you home. We love you no matter what.'" And she said, so I went the next day and I was standing in line getting ready for registration, and I looked around and I just knew I couldn't do it. I knew I wasn't ready. I knew I had to quit. And she says, I made that decision, and as soon as I made it, there was this incredible feeling of peace that came over me. And I turned to my mom and my dad to tell them that we needed to go home. And just at that moment, you came out of the Student Union building wearing the stupidest hat I have ever seen in my life. It was awesome. And you had a big sign promoting Shinorama, which is Students Fighting Cystic Fibrosis, a charity I've worked with for years. And you had a bucket full of lollipops. And you were walking along and you were handing the lollipops out to people in line and talking about Shinorama. And all of a sudden, you got to me and you just stopped and you stared. It was creepy. This girl right here knows exactly what I'm talking about. And then you looked at the guy next to me and you smiled and you reached in your bucket, you pulled out a lollipop and you held it out to him. And you said, you need to give a lollipop to the beautiful woman standing next to you. And she said, I have never seen anyone get more embarrassed faster in my life. He turned beet red, and he wouldn't even look at me. He just kind of held the lollipop out like this. And I felt so bad for this dude that I took the lollipop. And as soon as I did, you got this incredibly severe look on your face, and you looked at my mom and my dad, and you said, look at that, look at that. First day away from home, and already she's taking candy from a stranger. And she said everybody lost it. 20 feet in every direction, everyone started to howl. And I know this is cheesy, and I don't know why I'm telling you this, but in that moment when everyone was laughing, I knew that I shouldn't quit. I knew that I was where I was supposed to be, and I knew that I was home. And I haven't spoken to you once in the 4 years since that day, but I heard that you were leaving. And I had to come up and tell you that you've been an incredibly important person in my life, and I'm gonna miss you. Good luck. And she walks away, and I'm flattened. And she gets about 6 feet away, she turns around and smiles and goes, you should probably know this too. I'm still dating that guy 4 years later. A year and a half after I moved to Toronto, I got an invitation to their wedding. Here's the kicker, I don't remember that. I have no recollection of that moment, and I've searched my memory banks because that is funny, and I should remember doing it, and I don't remember it. And that was such an eye-opening, transformative moment for me to think that maybe the biggest impact I'd ever had on anyone's life, a moment that had a woman walk up to a stranger 4 years later and say, you've been an incredibly important person in my life, was a moment that I didn't even remember. How many of you guys have a lollipop moment, a moment where someone said something or did something that you feel fundamentally made your life better? All right. How many of you have told that person they did it? See, why not? We celebrate birthdays where all you have to do is not die for 365 days. And yet we let people who have made our lives better walk around without knowing it. And every single one of you has been the catalyst for a lollipop moment. You have made someone's life better by something that you said or that you did. And if you think you haven't, think about all the hands that didn't go back up when I asked that question. You're just one of the people who hasn't been told. But it is so scary to think of ourselves as that powerful. It can be frightening to think that we can matter that much to other people. Because as long as we make leadership something bigger than us, as long as we keep leadership something beyond us, as long as we make it about changing the world, we give ourselves an excuse not to expect it every day from ourselves and from each other. Marianne Williamson said, our greatest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our greatest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light and not our darkness that frightens us. And my call to action today is that we need to get over that. We need to get over our fear of how extraordinarily powerful we can be in each other's lives. We need to get over it so we can move beyond it. And our little brothers and our little sisters, and one day our kids, or our kids right now, can watch us start to value the impact we can have on each other's lives more than money and power and titles and influence. We need to redefine leadership as being about lollipop moments. How many of them we create, how many of them we acknowledge, how many of them we pay forward, and how many of them we say thank you for. Because we've made leadership about changing the world, and there is no world. There's only 6 billion understandings of it. And if you change one person's understanding of it, one person's understanding of what they're capable of, one person's understanding of how much people care about them, one person's understanding of how powerful an agent for change they can be in this world, you've changed the whole thing. And if we can understand leadership like that, I think if we can redefine leadership like that, I think we can change everything. And it's a simple idea, but I don't think it's a small one. And I want to thank you all so much for letting me share it with you today. Have a great day at TED. I'll see you later.
So guys, I hope you enjoyed that TED Talk. The Lollipop Moment has been a very important piece of training and development that we've used with our student leaders over the years. And it's always something that resonated with me, and I think I'm going to bring you in, Hamza, to maybe share your thoughts on it. But I really think it's so relevant to student leaders, because you're dealing with all sorts of issues on a day-to-day. A lot of students feeling anxious, feeling nervous, feeling concerned, worried, lost, and it really shows me the power of people, the power of understanding and kindness, and just understanding where people are at that moment. And you know, one moment can change everything for an individual, and it's the power of change, I think, that really goes a long way into making environments, if it's work, if it's business, if it's teamwork, collaboration, or even just family and friends. Like, one moment of kindness can really have an impact on everyone, and it's important to really understand where they're at, because life gets so busy at times that we're just focused on our agendas, the things we need to get done, because we're under pressure, and because we're so energy sapped because of that, it really is hard to stand still and just maybe take people for where they're at when they are in front of you. So, but that's what I took from it. What about you, Hamza?
Yeah, like it is one of my favorite kind of pieces when we are training, student leaders like SU or the peer mentors, mainly because it kind of forces you to take things into perspective, right? And that wasn't, no pun intended. But the whole reason that you are a leader, or that you're able to be a leader, is to try and influence change, right? So influencing change is the whole point, or the reason that you want to be a leader. You don't want to be a leader of a ship that's in the dock. Like, you don't you have to be out in the sea. You got to be out doing something. So if you're not trying to influence change, and you're not trying to actually make something happen, or to try and do something, then regardless of how good you are at public speaking, and regardless of how fancy slides you can make, it doesn't really show. So when it comes to these little lollipop moments, and the reason why I like them so much when we are doing the student trainings, is that because it forces you to kind of get out of your own comfort zone in the first place, but also it teaches others that it's okay, that it's okay to try and do something. And especially in that moment there, when he went up to the girl and made a little joke, and she felt more comfortable, he made her feel like it was okay to be comfortable. And something that a lot of student leaders, we want them to do that for first year students that come in, that they make them feel comfortable, that it's okay to be here, that it's okay, you are part of this. And that's kind of the general purpose. Like, you want them to be feeling comfortable, like they belong here, the belonging. And what good's a leader if their forces, or their army, or whatever you want to call it, they don't feel like they belong? The whole point of leadership, or the whole point of kind of leading your battalion, or whatever, I'm using a lot of like military phrases, but that's generally what we think of when we think of leaders. When you think of world leaders, right, if we take it in a grand scale of things, you look at the influential people who are able to move the masses and get them to do stuff, right? But it's always for a purpose. It's not just to, let's all gather together and sit in the park. No, you're not going to be a leader doing that. But the whole point of these, especially for students and for us, I know I rambled a little bit, is that you as a student leader, you don't know the little impact that you may have had on someone that has drastically altered their life for the good, and you can actively go out and actually do these things. Like, you'll see it in our own DBS life. Let's say when first year students come in, our students union and our student leaders are actually handing out lollipops and sweets and jellies on the first day. It's a good icebreaker, but it's also a good way to engage new students as well. And we've tried to create that. And when I asked before the audio was played, can you yourself, like the listeners, can you yourself think of someone that's done that for you, where your life took a different path for the better, and it was because of something or someone did something, and it really influenced you, and it really got you charged, it really got you motivated, but you never told them, and you never told them about it.
Yeah.
And same way you've probably done it for someone, and they've never told you about it, right?
And what's the power of telling them, Hamza, to you?
So I'm glad you said that, because I remember the first time that I ever watched that Lollipop video, I actually sat there and I thought about it, and I was like, you know what? I can think of 3 people, like literally 3 people. I'm like, they were a huge influence in my life, and I actually went and contacted them.
Wow.
And I'll talk about that in a separate podcast, so stay tuned. Got to keep the listeners hooked. But I'll talk about those 3 stories. So like and subscribe, and I'll talk about those at a later date, because it is kind of relevant. But for me, when someone told me, and this actually, so someone very recently told me this, that I did something that has drastically influenced and changed their life. Okay. And they are now in Barcelona doing their dream course that they've always wanted to do, because of something so trivial and stupid that I interacted with them about. And they were like, since that day, I knew that this is what I wanted to do. And this is where I am now. And I still talk to that person. I don't want to give away too many hints, because people will know who it is, and they told me to keep it private. But they're over there, and they're doing their thing, and they absolutely love it. And they're like, I cannot believe. And then they were actually like, I can't believe I'm telling you this, but I'm telling you this. And it was literally how that girl described it with that guy. And it's a weird feeling. It's a
much
very
influence
strange,
you can have on someone.
it's a very strange, odd feeling that you had an impact on someone's life to such a degree, and it was nothing to you, but it was huge for them.
I'd like to bring just both these in on this one, and why start with you, Hamza, since you're on a roll at the moment. But how can you practice empathy within groups, within fast-paced environments? And sometimes I'm certainly guilty of it. Like, you just don't have to, you have to deliver on some things. There's a short deadline, and it's sometimes hard to empathize with people because you're so focused on the output rather than the process, and the human element is nearly removed because it's just a resource issue that needs to be. You just want it fulfilled. You don't really care how they are or where they're at. So, like, what has to change there, do you think, for meaningful empathy to take place?
I think that there is that dilemma, and especially when it comes to the workplace, that there is this thing of, well, okay, I can sit here and be empathetic and be sympathetic with you for the next 2 hours, but in 2 hours' time, that thing's still going to happen. So whether or not we get it done together, or it's not going to get done. So regardless of that, we still have a deadline. The deadline doesn't matter. The deadline doesn't care whether or not we're not feeling our best in today's time, and all those kind of things. The deadlines don't generally care about those kind of things. And that is one of the big struggles that you'll have when you are in the workplace. And it'll be up to, yourself to also realize that, like, okay, this is the situation that I'm in. These things need to be get done. And maybe you need to give yourself half an hour, maybe give the other person half an hour, just to kind of, reel themselves in and figure out what they need to figure out. But at the end of the day, especially in the workforce, it's one of those, like, push and pull scenarios where one side pushes, the other side will pull as well, and you can't not have.
But where do you pull, and then or you begin to push them, and then you stop showing empathy because you're kind of saying, well, I understand you're there right now, but
well, this is the thing. So a lot of people fall into this trap of what they think is empathy in these scenarios is they go at least, or they try and silver line. Silver lining is one of the worst things you can do if you're trying to actually be empathetic, because if you're silver lining, that means you're dismissing. So it's like, okay, give you an example. And this is from the video I saw years ago, and it was like, the lady says, oh, my son's getting kicked out of school, and the other person says, oh, well, at least your daughter is still in school. Like, do you get me? Like, is that real empathy? It's like, no. It's like, oh, you fell down the stairs. Well, at least you didn't break all your legs.
Yeah.
It's kind of like that. So when it's like, oh, I didn't get this thing done, well, at least you got that done. So there's the whole at least, or like the silver lining thing. I think if we start getting away from that and we show even like 5 minutes of genuine empathy to people, just so they can take the perspective, like, okay, you know what I'm going through. So, okay, you kind of understand it. And if you're able to understand it and you're able to keep moving forward, okay, then I can probably do it too. It's that kind of like you're taking people with you rather than pushing them. And I think that's where the line needs to be drawn, where it's like, okay, I can take that perspective with you. We can have that 5 minutes of me taking that viewpoint. But now that we've taken that viewpoint and we're both understanding of it, okay, now let's move together here, rather than me just telling you, okay, look, get over it and move on.
Yeah.
But I don't know, CK, like you've had more experience on that side of the workforce.
I was gonna say it makes it a little bit hard because I've been in HR and I would say that I'm a very empathetic person, but sometimes depending obviously on what's happening, there is no room. Like you can be empathetic, but it doesn't change the outcome. It doesn't change what's happening. I'll give you a very clear example. So in the last job that I had, they were very strict about sick leave and the absence policy. So after a while, one of the managers decided to actually have a look at it's not a roster, but have a look at the like people's times and schedules and stuff like that. How many times were they off sick? How many of it was undocumented doctor's letters and things like that? And it's very strict in the sense of like, let's say you can't have more than 20 sick days in 1 year period, you know, that kind of way, especially if you don't have a doctor's note. And a conversation has to be had. Now, the person who went and sat in front of the HR person had already explained most of the times they're off sick was due to stress. And they had, you know, talked to their managers about the amount of work that they had to do, but they were constantly being told that, you know, like this, every other person before you has done this job. What else do you want us to do? You know, that kind of way. It was more of a sense of like, well, it sounds like you can't handle the job. Do you know, that kind of way?
Taking nothing else into consideration about their life.
Exactly. That's what it was. And that's where it started. It was like that. And then it went down. Obviously, the person went excessive sick days, even though they had a doctor's note and stuff like that. But the conversation still had to be had, as in, do you understand the policy of the company is that if it does continue, it will be led to disciplinary action, because that is what it is. We're explaining the rules and procedures to you. You know what they are. You know, we can understand that these things happen and things like that. However, it does leave the other person feeling, I know that this person in particular felt as if, okay, so I have actual reasons for being sick. I actually spoke to management. But in that specific example, there was a lack of empathy and understanding from the managerial point of view. However, you could still see their point of view in the sense of, you have to perform at this level. This is the level that you're coming in, and it's not up to par to what we need. And this is where we need you to go, type of thing. So it's sometimes,
and that's where business can really be cold and
because they have
the
to
human
be.
elements can be really missing from, and I suppose as a manager, you can be kind of shackled and tied by like old cold processes that like really, because like you're doing your job because you're saying once you reach a threshold, you know, you trigger disciplinary action and so on. So not only do people need understanding, organizations perhaps need better understanding of people and more context to everything, I think. And I think context is a key word here, really, isn't it?
That's it.
To how we unpack things and how we, I suppose, paint a bigger picture. But I suppose empathy in action is not, you know, it's easy enough to define, but it's really hard to maybe put into play, particularly as a manager or a middle manager, because you're being pressed by someone above. And like sometimes, like my argument is, you don't sometimes have the time to be empathetic. It's like, you know, you can't sit there with everyone. It's like, well, you have to kind of, you know, sometimes the management above you aren't that empathetic, and you know, you're showing empathy, and it makes your output longer to achieve, or deadlines have to be pushed out because you're sitting with people and trying to understand it. And maybe it's just sometimes it makes more sense just to be, you know, robust and process driven.
I was going to say that sometimes some managers can be too over empathetic, and some people can take advantage of it. you know, that
agree.
kind of way. So you'll have a manager who actually does care about their employees' well-being and what's happening in their personal lives. And an employee might be able to actually see that, like, oh, if I say this, I'm going to get my deadlines pushed back or an additional day off or whatever it might be, and things like that. Or Jesus Christ, you know, like my back is hurting today. And it's, you know what, take the day off because blah, blah, blah. So
You're
that's
describing
where...
me and Hamza's relationship here. You do realize that,
I'm
CK.
feeling like I need a day off right now. But actually, no, it's really interesting that you guys talked about that because so a bit of current thing that's going on right now. So this is for any of our listeners who know anything about cricket, but if you don't, I'm going to fill you in 2 seconds. So Australia and England have this huge rivalry. Okay.
Yeah.
And they're like it's like Batman Joker. It's like, the biggest rivalry you can think of. So they have this cricket competition that they do every 4 years called the Ashes. Now, this is really interesting because the Australian coach just got fired, even though they won. The England coach just got fired, even though they lost. Their two managing styles for the coaches were very different. One was very empathetic, and he actually gave his players time off during COVID. He let them spend time with their families. He let the world's #1 player for their team anyway take 6 months, miss the World Cup just so he can rest and recuperate because of his mental health. He gave him all that time off. He took care of everyone's specific needs, right? Did everything that they asked for. They got all the leave they want. They got all the time off they want. They spent time with their families. The families flew with them to Australia, all those kind of things, right? They did all of that. Now, what other manager would let their best player sit out a World Cup just to get some rest? Nobody would, but he did. Then on the flip side, you had the super micromanaging of the Australian guy who literally micromanaged everything of what they're doing, when they're eating lunch, when they're eating breakfast, everything. Australian guy won, got fired because he was too strict. England guy got fired because they lost, but he was too nice. So where do you draw the line there? And it's so interesting that you guys are talking about it, and it literally just happened. And this is one of the great debates that's going on. It's like, how do you as a manager draw that line? Because even these professionals at that level can't seem to figure it out, because people will find a way to either, take more than they're given, or a way to complain. But I just thought it was really interesting. He just reminded me of it there.
No, and I think you're really onto something there, Hamza. And I know we're about to do a round table on it as well, CK. You're going to go through some of the exercises of it. But I suppose broadly in a working context, I do think there not just a science, but there's an art form to it as well. Into like you're talking about the push and pull, Hamza. Sometimes you need to be empathetic. Sometimes you need to show less empathy, and you need to get things done. And I think your environment as well, like you're saying, CK, people can perhaps take advantage of that if you're seen to be too, emotive and empathetic, to some degree. It can be taken advantage of. I had a good discussion with a friend of mine who works in construction recently, and I was talking about the empathetic environments within, let's say, human resources and office-based jobs, and they're polar apart in a lot of senses. Like, you couldn't go onto, let's say, a building site where and let people discuss their problems, and sometimes there are groups of people that have to be just led, and it just works. And it's the same with let's say sports teams, and I suppose maybe they're more kind of underpinned under kind of toxic masculinity or whatever, but I do think that empathetic environments maybe don't work for everyone, and perhaps can't work, or maybe that's the problem, that maybe that's the direction where it does need to go to some degree. But there are authoritarian elements that just work. They just work for the environment, and they suit the leader, they suit the group, and there's just clarity. And once people have that, it can be successful.
I was going to say, is that due to the fact that the focus is on getting the job done in the limited time? So if you think about construction, right, you can't build up a house and decide that it's going to go from 8 months of getting the work done, and then all of a sudden, do you know what? We're actually going to have 12 months. We just want to do it a year. Do you know, that kind of way? You have a time limit. There's a deadline. It's even if with the likes of what Hamza was saying in sports. In sports, you have 90 minutes. Let's say football, you've got 90 minutes to get whatever points you need, and it depends on where you are in the league. So is it the sense that you're a couple of points behind, so you have to score, or is it the sense that it has to be draw, or, you know, things like that. There's so many other factors where when it comes to that, it's like, we don't have time to figure out who's okay, who's not okay. We need you to get in.
Decisive
We're
action
4
needs to be
points.
taken.
Yeah. We're 4 points behind and we have 15 minutes. Hamza, why are you laughing?
I don't know
It's
why.
weird
I'm
for
just
me
laughing
because I'm
because
thinking
yeah,
football
no,
allergy.
no, because I'm laughing because I don't know why. I now think that you think every sport just lasts for 90 minutes, no
No,
matter what the
no.
sport is. Chess 90 minutes,
I know golf
tennis
is
90
like
minutes.
hours. It's like 9
Yeah,
hours
they
or
go on for
whatever.
a
I
while.
understand. That's why
Yeah,
I said football. I went
yeah.
back and I was like, football, it's 90 minutes and you only have that specific amount of time. It's the same with construction, Adam, or any of those. Maybe the toxic masculine roles that we're speaking about are the ones where there's definitive and determined deadlines and you can't, there's no wiggle room with them. You know, that kind of way,
So
either
are you
you do
saying
it or you don't.
in that sense, if you're showing empathy, it's a luxury for time and like space and like, you know, processes, that whereas if the deadline's on you, like the reality is that tough decisions are made and like are a little
Yeah.
bit authoritarian.
See, I wouldn't say
Yeah.
it's controversial to say that because there are certain jobs that you need to have a lot more empathy and sympathy for, and there are certain kind of career paths that train you for that. So it always comes back to like you're not actually taught how to be sympathetic and empathetic. You're not. You're either like people always say you either have it or you don't, but that's not true. It's like anything else. You can actually train yourself to be better, and you can actually learn that. Like doctors in med school, like, you know, they learn how to do these things. They learn how to, you know, go through the stages of grief with a patient whose family members died or whatever. They've learned how to do those things. It's not like they're born with it. So anyone can learn to do those things. But the fact of the matter is that certain, like, you know, professions and certain fields, it's just not conducive to that because you become more of a hindrance. So rather than dealing with it on site, they should have external support available so that, okay, well, if something is going on and you may need this kind of support, grand, we have some external things that you can do it, so you can do it at that time, but not during the time that, like, you know, like a like, you know, in a situation where you actually need to get work done in a very precise amount of time, that it's just not conducive to that. So maybe it needs to be a bit more talked about, or maybe it needs to be more available. But I just remember there, and I will forget this, so I might as well just throw it in there now. Did you guys know that sympathy, if you like the Greek original translation, means together suffering, which is very interesting. So it's like you're actually suffering with the other person, and empathy is a lot more close and it's personal, where you're actually feeling with the other person. So it's a good way to distinguish the two.
So sympathy
Is together suffering, which is like us as a collective. Like if there was like a natural disaster, it's sympathy. It's not empathy because you can't relate to one person. So it's like together suffering.
Sympathize,
And then and then empathy is feeling for the other person.
Right. We're gonna I know you're alluding to, I suppose, how what people can do, Hamza, and that kind of teases up nicely into the next part of this session. I think, CK, you're going to bring us through like what it's like to go through a round table with Lift Ireland, and you know, how that goes. I know there's a robust kind of process. So if you are sitting peacefully with your journal, we really invite you to you know, grab your pen and grab your paper, and you know, put empathy at the top of the empathy and understanding at the top of the page, and we can get going. So I'll pass over to you, CK, and me and Hamza will happily be guinea pigs today, whatever you need, and guide us through your road of discovery around empathy and understanding, please.
Grant. Actually, do you know what? The beginning of this podcast was perfect for the round table, because usually when you start a Lift round table, you go through empathy and understanding, the meaning behind it. So what does it do? Where does it come from? As well as, you know, how do you understand it and perceive it to be? And that's kind of what you and Hamza discussed at the very beginning of this. We talked about empathy in the workplace. We talked about it in regards to relationships. What does it do? Influence, things like that. So we've already covered that. And that's essentially what's covered in the roundtable, is ensuring that each and every single person sitting here fully understands, what does empathy and understanding mean? How does it impact your life, my life, everybody around you? And even just to start kind of opening your mind as to, okay, what does empathy and understanding look like in my relationships? And I don't just mean the people that you're closest to. I mean, it's starting from those that are most close to you in the same house, and then expanding out to even your friends, the community, that relationship that you have with everybody around you. You know, that's essentially where it is. So then you start looking at the characteristics then of this specific value. So we've already spoken about it. When you look at the characteristics, so how can we identify that somebody is empathetic or somebody is understanding? Do you know, that kind of way? Like if I was to ask you, Adam, like, what does it look like to you if somebody is understanding and empathetic?
I think for me, there'd be a calmness to them.
Yeah.
There'd be an openness to them. There'd be a genuine authenticness to them as well. And that they would be very caring. I think it's probably top of the board there for me. Like they would generally care. And and have probably a warmth. Like anyone who I've met as empathetic would have a warmth to them, and you'd gravitate towards them because of, they show the empathy. But that would be characteristics for me, I think, off the top of my head.
Yeah. What about you, Hamza?
Again, it's like Adam said, like it depends how they're coming across to you. Some people are very good at faking it, which is fine. And if
fake it till you make it.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that, honestly. But you can pick the genuine cases from the chancers. Whereas I usually, like I give benefit of the doubt to chancers. I'm like, you know what, maybe they are trying to, get to that point, and maybe they are just practicing, but maybe they are just trying to get to that point. So yeah, I'd kind of fall on the 50-50 on that, where it's like, it just really depends on, again, context is king, right?
Yeah. You're completely right in what you said, just in regards to characteristics and how people are. So according to Lift, it's one of the things is when the person tries to see things from another person's point of view. So a lot of that, Adam, kind of would go hand in hand with what you were saying about the calmness, the softness. So if I'm thinking about a situation has happened and, you're coming to me and you're calm and you're trying to kind of get the full story, the full picture, that's essentially where I get that from. You recognize and respect another person's unique abilities. So it's that actually is in line with what Hamza was saying about the silver lining thing. So you're recognizing someone's unique abilities, or you are seeing that somebody is different, their perspective, but you're celebrating that, rather than, I'm so different. If you were to think about it in a workplace, or even if a student is thinking about, I'm so different from everybody else, rather than them having to feel like that, why not them be celebrated for the fact that they're unique? And I think it's also just thinking about yourself as a leader, why would you want to be like every other leader? Would you not want to be like a leader where you're marching to the beat of your own drum more than anything else, right? And that's essentially where the characteristics comes in. It's also having someone with a very forgiving attitude. I don't like to talk about myself a lot about this, but something since I was a kid, I've apparently never been able to hold a grudge since I was like very, very young. My mom used to say I used to get in trouble. She would shout at me. My sister wouldn't talk to her for the whole day, and an hour later I'd be there back like her best friend, completely forgetting that I got into trouble. So that's another characteristics of empathy and understanding, is someone who can possibly understand if somebody does something to them, whether it's maybe saying something like that, and the person being forgiving. And I think it would just depend. Hamza, I'd ask you, what does forgiveness look like to you, especially if somebody's wronged you?
Yeah, this is very interesting, and it's very like individual dependent. So I would say I have a really high threshold. That if someone bothers me or annoys me or whatever, it doesn't do anything to me. In one ear, out the other, doesn't matter. But I have a really high threshold for that. And then once someone reaches that threshold or beyond, like I have my way of dealing with it and my system. And it's if someone pushes me above and beyond my limit and that threshold, then they're gone. Like they're just cut from me, like from my life, they're gone. And it may not be the most healthy way, I'm not sure. But the thing is, the threshold is ridiculously high. So in my entire lifetime, I think there's only been 3 people that I've ever had to like really be like, okay, that's it, done.
Yeah.
Like, clean slate. And once that's gone, it's gone. Like I don't hold grudges. I'm very indifferent to a lot of things, because I'm like, majority of the times when people are lashing out or whatever, it's really got nothing to do with you. It's whatever's going on with them. And I don't know if that's the counselor, psychologist talking, but I've always kind of been like that. I'm like, someone says something to me, I'm like, wow, you got a lot going on.
Yeah.
There's like whatever it is, you know. Now, granted, if it's about work or something, then that's different. But if it's like a individual, personal thing, or your friends just randomly lash out, or you have an argument with your friend, I'm very quick to be like, yeah, okay, we had an argument, whatever, get over it, you know.
Yeah. What about you, Adam? What does forgiveness look like for you?
It's something that I'm getting better at as I mature. Yeah, like I would probably have held grudges as a younger person growing up, but it's definitely something I'm practicing more of. When I think back, like I grew up in like an all boys school, you know, I played all boys sports. Obviously, secondary school was all boys as well. So generally within a male driven kind of environment, where like, you know, a lot of stuff was hard to forgive at times, and that's the way it was. But yeah, like it's definitely something that I'm trying to be more of. That's why I'm really keen to learn more about, you know, the characteristics of it today, and what action steps can be put into place to being more empathetic, and, you know, educating myself around what empathy is has definitely helped me to kind of unpack why I feel a certain way, and how, you know, as Hamza said there, it's not sometimes you, it's the reason they're lashing out is because they have other stuff going on in their lives, and, you know, maybe you can, it makes forgiveness a little bit easier when you kind of say, well, like, they're dealing with a lot of stuff, like, you know, like, no wonder they're aggressive in that way, or no wonder they're like having trouble with this. And I think once you know, practice a bit of empathy, you can understand why people are. But a problem for me, you can't undo it unless you have calmness in your own life. So in that space to reflect, and putting time aside for that is a key thing. And anyone listening here today, you know, we're speaking about the journaling and taking notes and reflecting your ideas and so on, is really, really important. So I think it's super relevant to unpack those type of things.
I was just going to say with that, because you said that you're developing a forgiving attitude, and that you've obviously developed it over the years, and that actually would lead me on to my next point then, is the benefits of empathy and understanding, which is your ability to influence others and motivate others. And I think it's a prime example with that because of your position, Adam. If you think about, you said that you know, held grudges in the past and things like that, and you've developed and you've gotten better at empathizing and understanding. But now look at you, you're in a position where you are student services manager. You're in a position to influence, if you think about the student population and, you know, the people that work beside you, your peers, your colleagues. So it's because of that, from you developing and trying to be more forgiving, and you trying to, you know, move more positively, that you've actually developed the ability to influence and motivate others, which is actually a benefit of empathy and understanding.
And I suppose I'm a proven case that you can practice it, even if it's not innate within you, because I am definitely someone, anyone who knows me say, you know, I would be harder to forgive. I'd probably carry things, which is a very, very bad trait, but I'm actively getting better, which is important.
The other benefit I was going to say was just that you are actually really, really an effective communicator. And I feel like Hamza demonstrates that really, really well. And Hamza, I don't know whether it's because you just have this threshold that you are like, this is it. If you go over it, you're gone. I don't know. Or you have high levels of empathy and understanding, but that's essentially where it is. You're an effective communicator, so you know how to communicate with people. And I'd say it's actually very necessary in your role as welfare.
Yeah, it's, I'm not sure. Like, I think I've gotten better at it as time's gone on. I think earlier in my youth, let's say, I would have been very quick to be like, okay, you told me your thing, that's fine. I told you my thing, that's fine. If you don't see eye to eye, away you go. You know, it would have been, there was very little compromise there. And I think as you kind of grow older and as more life experiences and more gray areas, you find life is a lot of gray areas.
Yeah.
and how you handle them is really kind of what shows what level you're at in terms of your empathy and sympathy. But yeah, like for me, it's always been kind of like that high threshold, and I think I got that from my dad, because my dad's very much like that. Like he's just got this thing where nothing really bothers him. But then when certain things reach such a high threshold, he's like, okay, rather than me worrying about it now, the fact that it's at this level means I can just get rid of it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, okay, it's overflowing, grand, just get rid of it now, rather
Yeah.
than trying to patch it up and stick bandages on it every week.
Mm.
This is actually really weird, but I just remember this now. My dad said this to me once when I was a young kid, and he literally said, if you're gonna cry every day for the next 10 days, why can't you just sit down and cry now and get it all out of your system, so at least you have the next 9 days to enjoy what you want to do. And I always thought that was great. I was like, you know what, that's great advice, even though I've never cried, but that's great advice. I'm like, that's great advice, because
I'm
I'm
so
like,
convinced
you
I
know
want to
what?
see this.
Yeah, rip the bandage off, and rather than spending 10 days crying, just get it all done in one day, and you can enjoy the rest of the 9.
Yeah, definitely,
Yes.
definitely.
I don't know what
It's
has to
actually
do
a
with
really nice
sympathy. I
one.
just came to my mind. Sorry, I'm rambling.
The other part that I want to just focus on in regards of empathy when it comes to the benefits is your ability to see other people's potential. So if you think about you understanding someone's situation and basically what they're experiencing in their personal life, you would know exactly what they're capable of producing. So in a managerial position, what type of support and encouragement and motivation do they need in order for them to perform at that? Do you need to have little chats with them? Is it that you have to kind of configure their schedules? Is it that maybe they need to start later because they are absolutely useless in the morning? I don't know, but it's your ability as a manager. It will increase from there. So I'm going to move on, guys. What's your rating? If you're going to, I'm going to ask you guys to rate yourselves. And we're going to start with you from a scale of 1 to 5. So we've identified the characteristics as well as the benefits before we go into the steps that we're going to follow, because I'm going to tie those in with steps to follow and actions that you can take to improve your rating. But score yourself from a scale of 1 to 5 in regards to empathy and understanding. What would you give yourself?
I've been taking notes of each of the kind of 5 characteristics that you've listed there. So seeing from the other lens, seeing the unique abilities of others, having a forgiving attitude, being an effective communicator, and seeing others' potential to succeed. I would say I'm doing pretty good on 3 out of them 5. So I'd give myself, it's a bit of a, in between type thing, and it's a bit of a cop out. So I'm going to say a 3 out of 5. It's definitely something I'm getting better at, but I really am behind on a lot of people. And I'm not going to labor my point, but I think it's a skill in like other people thinking that you're empathetic as well. Like I'm probably like I could probably feel I will listen to them, but like I would have my opinion anyway, and that's probably a contradiction in itself. But sometimes that's actually more important, because I know people who are probably very empathetic and they would portray that they're not, and like sometimes it's actually more important is how you're being perceived than how you actually are. And so I'm probably perceived as being much more empathetic than I actually am, and I'm probably ashamed to admit that, but perhaps that's a skill in itself. And I don't know, Hamza, maybe you're the opposite.
I'm glad it finally came up, because this is a really interesting thing that I've seen over the years with some of my friends as well, but also something that I've come across while you're actually doing welfare sessions and you're kind of trying to counsel students. Is there a point where you become so empathetic that the issue actually becomes yours? And I bet anyone listening now has been in that situation where your friend's problems become your problems. And that's not empathy at that point, right? That's not empathy. That's like chameleonism. That's you taking on their stuff for whatever. There's multiple reasons as to why people do it, but there reaches a point where it's no longer empathy and it's no longer genuine. And then even the other person can start feeling like, yo, this is my thing. Like, why are you trying to piggyback off my situation? But yeah, just an interesting point. So if anyone's is curious about that.
And that's a real worry, I think, for people maybe scoring, 5 and above. I think that there's an energy tax for empathy, I think. I think you have to pay that back tenfold when you you go home and say, oh my God, I wonder if they're going to be okay, and I wonder if they they left in bad form, or will they quit the job now? Will they leave? Will they do something else? Will they lash out? And I think that's
well, that I'll cover during the
not
boundaries
discussed.
section of the training. So when you guys
I
are listening to
literally
this,
was gonna say that.
yeah, I'm just here to plug all the other stuff that I'm going to be doing.
So Hamza, what's your score then? So you've really you've let us know that you can, if you go above the 5, just in the sense that you can get too involved and be too empathetic, if you will. But for yourself, what would you rate yourself between 1 to 5 when it comes to empathy and understanding?
I think I'm definitely better at it now. I would have said, if you had asked me this a few years ago, I think understanding wise, I would have been at a 2, where I just couldn't fathom it. I was like, how can you how could you be feeling down? Like, how could you not get yourself up? Like, how could you not? And it was always like me putting myself in their shoes, but I'm like, well, hold on, maybe my feet are not the same size as their shoes.
Yeah.
You get me? And then it was more like, okay, well, I gotta walk in that mindset that they're in. So I'm definitely much better at the understanding now, and I think it's partially due to the nature of the job, but also the just the how fast paced, like, our office is. That is just constantly, like, the amount of intake that we have is just new students all the time. So you get very good, and you get very, like, quick at being able to understand, okay, this is what's going on. So I would say now I'm at a 3.5, maybe 4 on understanding. But with the empathy and sympathy, it just depends on how good I am at faking it that day. No, I'm joking. It really kind of just, again, it really depends. I definitely think I have a much better understanding of the difference between the two since I started working in this job, and kind of being able to help people through either empathy or sympathy. Sometimes they don't need both. Sometimes they just, some people just need sometimes people just want to, let off some steam, and they need someone to hear them. And that's why one of the mentors that I had, actually someone who mentored me when I got this job, told me this line, and it was like, some people, like, they don't need an answer. They just want to know that someone heard them, so that they need to hear themselves say the things they need to say. And that's a really great line, because true empathy is actually silence. Like, if you're actually talking about, like, empathetic skills and whatever, silence, because they just want to be heard. And so I think I'm much better at that, at the listening aspect of things.
Well, that's so
deep.
No, it's so important.
Just feel like,
and it's something, Hamza, that I've noticed recently as well, that I'm trying to do. And my default is to give advice, is to say, oh, you should do this. Why don't you try that? Don't be worried about this. This
do it this way.
This is what's going to improve that for you. And it's actually probably, it's against my nature, because that's, I've a want to kind of help and to bring people on. But like you said, like, silence, if they just want a sound barrier off you, and nothing you can do can change how someone is feeling. And I remember I was listening to a podcast recently, and it was a member of the police force, and I think it was in Ireland, and he was talking about how he's evolved in terms of empathy and so on. He'd be called to the scene, and there could be, like, someone let's say, for example, taken their own life, and they could have left a family behind. And he was dealing with a case with a woman, and her husband had taken his life, and the question, she was obviously distraught, and the question was, what do I tell my kids? And there was nothing. She asked him a question, but he knew there was nothing he could say.
That was the right answer. There's no right answer.
There's no right answer. And there's nothing he should say, because she's just unpacking her problem and verbalizing it. And I think it's a really important thing that people actually try to do that. So when you are in a leadership role or in a working environment, sometimes people are asking you a question, and I think it's actually so hard not to answer. I would unpack that, and I would sit with them and be showing sympathy, rather than just being present for them and just being there. And And I think that takes discipline, because if I was there today or tomorrow, like, I don't think I could just sit there and say nothing. I just think it's so strange for me. But yeah,
And
like,
people
it's,
might think that our podcast is scripted, but that actually ties in perfectly with the start of how the podcast went, is that you as a student leader don't have to solve everything. You don't have to solve anything. And it's one of the main things that we talk about when we do the SU training, or when we do the peer mentor training, is that you guys are, well, as much as possible, are signposters. You're like GPS, you're Google Maps, you know? And
pointing them to the direction where they can
yeah,
get the help.
point them at the directions of, you know, like, you have specialists for that. If you look at any great leaders or any, like, you know, big CEOs or whatever companies, they don't do all that work, but they know exactly who to put where, and they know exactly who to guide to where. And that's really where it's at. Like, that you're comfortable enough that whoever you're leading and whoever is with you, and they trust you, that you know where to send them and you know where to guide them, that you're laying out this map, that, you know, you're going to be like, go here, go here, go here, and they go there and it works out for them. That's a good leader. That's a good leader. Not that you're sending them down the wrong path or whatever, you know?
Yeah, that makes sense. I like that.
Mm.
Okay, second last one. Who is someone that exemplifies this skill to you, and why? Who? Actually, I'll give you an example. When I did this the last time, I couldn't pick a single person to say exemplified empathy and understanding. I actually chose a group of friends. And that was because of the fact that me and this group of girls, we've known each other since we were about, I'd say 14, 15. We're all South African as well, which is just like, all here, all different times of the year. But the only reason why I said the empathy and understanding in that was because no matter what had taken place over the last couple of years, that group had remained consistent, remained like empathetic and understanding, even when there was really times like when I came out, like, the girls are one of the first people that I told. And I was absolutely, I don't want to use bad language, but I was so scared because I was so afraid of losing that friendship group. But each and every single one of them just demonstrated to me empathy and understanding. It was like, I don't get it because I don't like girls the same way that you do, but I do understand why you're afraid, considering the fact of the same upbringing, but you're still our friend, still the same person. So cool.
Amazing.
Like, that was it. Yeah, like, there was like very little. And one of my other friends actually turned around to me and she was like, why are you coming out to me? I never have to come out to you to say I was straight. And she was like, why are we doing this? That's what she said to me. She was just like, I know, I don't need you to tell me. There was no reason to have this conversation. She actually made me be like, girl, what the hell are you talking about? Because I don't know what you're talking about. But yeah, so I just found it was very hard for me. Just found one single person in my life that I felt was really good at demonstrating that value of empathy and understanding. So I just wanted to kind of put it out there, just when you're thinking about who it is that stands out to you. I don't know, Hamza, do you have anybody in mind, or a group of people?
It's so funny that you say that, because it's happened with my group of friends as well. And I think it's because so a lot of my friends, like we grew up, like 16 of us that grew up together in like the same neighborhood, and now everyone's like living in so many different parts of the world, but we're all still connected on WhatsApp. And even with my own like younger brother's group of friends here as well. And it's so bizarre, or just the way that it's worked out, is that they're like, you know, in so many different fields, like lawyers, doctors, dentists, whatever. And then obviously me in this field. And then as soon as like anyone has an issue now, it's like bang. And they're okay to talk to me about it. But like, I think it's because we've developed that now within the group. And there'll be so many times where we're literally like, because as a group of guys, you can't just go in and start talking about this stuff. It just doesn't happen. But in a roundabout way, it always comes back to this. And it always comes back to like, you know, the DMC moments. It always comes back to like randomly at like 1 a.m. in the group chat starts hopping because someone asked something. And then I answered it with something. And then it's like a discussion on that. And it just has become this thing. So I think it's just like you influenced your own friend culture, your own group of friends first. And then from there, it starts kind of growing. But if you had to ask me to pick an individual, I can't think of anything really. Like, I can't think of one specific individual that would have,
because you're that person to a lot of people in your life.
I think I've just become that now. That it's just like, even like even at home, like if my my brother or like my mom or sister, like they want to say something, like, or even my cousins back home, like they'll message me randomly. And it's just like, okay.
You are a great person to talk to. I will say that.
I just listen.
But
no, but and it's just become that thing. But I think it's because the title, and like people are like, okay, I can say this to him.
Mm.
But hopefully like people become more comfortable saying that, and like within their own group of friends. And I think if you have that as a little core, that your fail safe, your safety net, then that's a very, very good start. So look out for those people that you have in your.
And I just love the point there, like you just listen, Hamza, and I think, you know, a lot of students have benefited from that listening ear from you, and maybe that's a key message for everyone here today, CK, that at the very essence, it's just, you know, you're given 2 ears and 1 mouth, so like you should be listening more than you should be talking. And I think you know, the silence piece and genuinely caring and using good body language to show that you're switched on and they're trying to relate to the feelings that they're having, but not answering, you know.
Exactly. Yeah. What about you, Adam? Anybody stands out to you?
Yeah, probably my parents. Like, I think both of them were very empathetic. I think whenever there's an issue, they're always with you on it. You know, they're always caring and genuinely wanting the best for you, and not always giving advice, but they're just concerned that you know, you're making your own choices in your own way, but with the love and support behind them. And whenever anyone in our family is dealing with an issue, they're always there with you when you need it. And I think that's really important, and a really big thing for the older generation who are like, I hope that type of care isn't leaving our population or our society, should I say.
Yeah, 100%. It's actually really good, because then it brings me on to my last bit then, was just about the actions that we could take. And you guys really just, you kind of hit the nail on the head. When you look at the steps to follow in order to develop better empathy and understanding, the first one is do not listen to reply, but listen to understand. It's actually the very first one that comes up, is listen to understand, not to reply. And then it also is just about asking questions. So the first two are really just all about listening skills, if we're being very honest. Considering other people's feelings is another one. So just in regards of how things are said and maybe perceived, and things like that as well, emotionally. And then the last one then is remember that people want to be valued and appreciated. So recognize and respect the unique qualities of those that are in your work, social and personal environments. The last bit, this is just me kind of popping it in there, is just being careful not to react so quickly. Because sometimes we can be fueled or motivated by our emotions, and our reactions to something that somebody has said or a specific type of incident can be very negative, or maybe highly charged, or have a lot of anger infused words said. But that's something where it's like, just stop for a second, you know, that kind of way, kind of just take yourself in to be like, are you okay? Because I can be like that. I can be in the sense where sometimes I might react very strongly to something, and then afterwards be like, oh my God, like that wasn't necessary at all. I did not have to say that to that person. I'm after making her or him feel so bad, this, and the other. And it's just because I didn't take stock of my emotions, and I felt like, you know what? I'm angry about that. So this person is going to get a piece of my mind right now, instead of, hold on a sec, take a second to read. Is it really the thing? You know, can it be fixed? And then move on from there. Especially as well as that, is just remembering that with empathy and understanding, whatever that person has said or that incident that took place, having to remember, you know, what is that other person going through? What was the reasons that somebody maybe made a mistake in something that was very important? You know, we don't make mistakes on purpose because we want to just piss off our managers. We do it because it's, whether your mind is preoccupied with all the other things that are taking place in your personal life, but that's it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Some really good actions there to take to roll out. Like,
this allows me to give another extra plug. So here we go. So there will be an active listening portion as well in future workshops. So that way you can actually get, like, you know, real life practical tips and advice on how to become an active listener. Because sitting down and someone talking to you and, you know, noise going in one ear out the other, that's hearing, that's not listening. Listening actually requires you to put attention and focus. So we will be practicing that too.
Wow.
Awesome.
Yeah. Hearing
I would definitely encourage,
listening.
I was going to say, I would definitely encourage anyone who is listening to this to definitely go into the active listening, because sometimes people don't really understand that active listening and effective listening and hearing are three very, very, very different things. And I'm sure Hamza will be able to share easy ways for you to develop a skill that you possibly already have.
Okay.
Maybe being nice to you.
I'm just going to wrap it up here now, guys. And I want to thank CK and Hamza for their expert guidance. And I'm sure there's a lot of lessons the guys can carry forward into their own student roles as leaders, into their own personal, family and relationship and friendship groups as well. And definitely beyond that into the working world. And I think, definitely with more empathy and understanding, we're going to see, I suppose, more compassionate and honest and just caring environments for people to work, live and thrive within. I suppose, I hope you guys are, as listeners, taking notes, some really good things. Definitely the action steps. Do not listen to reply, listen, to really empathize with the person. Definitely ask more questions. Making people feel valued and appreciated through, being present and actively listening and good body language. And I think really important, being careful not to react too quickly. Don't butt in with, your agenda. Oh my God, that happened to me too. Or don't say, oh, that always happens, such and such, or here's what I think you should do. And I think really sitting with the silence and the presence is really important. So that's it for our empathy and understanding session. I'll be sending out some questions that I hope you guys can answer in relating to what are your action steps as a student going forward for this week. What would you score yourself out of 5 as CK brought us through? Which characteristics do you portray? Who epitomizes what empathy and understanding is to you? Can you practice the silence, the listening, and just being present with that individual and relating to their feelings? And I suppose the last thing, can you practice better active listening skills, the different affirmations and so on? And if you aren't sure how to practice them, Hamza, I know you've got a workshop coming up soon, so make sure you're keeping an eye out on that and so on.
$9.99.
Yeah.
Or free if you subscribe to the elevator program, the Elevate program, the elevator program.
But that's it, guys. I just want to say thanks for your time today. Thank you, Hamza. Thank you, CK. And we'll see you on the next podcast.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye, guys.